Today I want to talk to you about the Thebaid, an epic poem written in the early 90s AD by the Roman poet Statius in Latin. It tells the story of the war for the throne of Thebes. And this war can be likened in many ways to the American Civil War. It's a war of brother against brother. And it's bringing together these great heroes from within the Hellenic culture to contest this throne. But there's another way in which you could compare it to World War One. The Greek nation was not a nation at the time. It was a variety of peoples and political units, and these are banding together like disparate nations to contest the throne of Thebes. And so it is a bit of a world war in that sense, especially in the sense of this is, what really matters to the early Greek mind is Greece. But also it sets the backdrop for the Trojan War, which is the World War II of their time. And so it's important to kind of see those two in relation to each other as well, as we'll come back to in a moment. This war captured the Greek imagination every bit as much as the Trojan War did. It was one of their favorite themes for development in pretty much every genre of writing. We do know that it was written about a lot, and we do have references, and some of those texts survive, but there's also more that we have references to that doesn't survive, and then who knows what we don't even know that we don't know. But among the stuff that we're aware of, here are some treatments that it received. There are multiple references to the war and the events leading up to the war in the Iliad, and there are also a couple in the Odyssey. There's also a man called Stesichorus who wrote a poem about it, which we don't have. That poem is now lost. There was an epic poem in Greek from around the 6th century called BC called the Thebaid, or the Thebaid cycle as sometimes we refer to it, and we only have fragments of this, but it was apparently a major treatment in Greek, and this was something that would have been very popular and have developed these themes pretty widely. Pausanias, who is a 2nd century AD geographer, describes a scene he saw depicting the war on a chest. And so he's seeing a chest that is centuries old at his time, and engraved on the chest are scenes from the Theban War. And then there are accounts in Hellenicus, Pherecydes, Simonides, Bacchylides, and Pindar, all from the 5th century BC. The 5th century was especially fruitful time for writing and reflecting on the war at Thebes, and in addition to all of those accounts, we also have 3 distinct cycles of plays written about the events at Thebes. The first is Aeschylus' cycle, which we only have one of the plays from, the 7 against Thebes. Sophocles' Oedipus cycle is about these events, and then Euripides wrote 3 plays that were closely linked to one another that were about the events at Thebes. The Hypsipyle, which we have only in fragment, the Phoenician women, and the Suppliants. It's also discussed in late writers. Diodorus Siculus and Hyginus in the 1st century BC, and also Apollodorus in the 1st, 2nd century AD, both write about this theme and give their version of what happened there. So let me give you a little background to what this war is all about. You may remember the story of Oedipus, who was prophesied to murder his father and marry his mother when he was born, and his father said, nope, none of that, we'll just get rid of him. And so he has him exposed out on the mountain. He's actually, nailed to the ground through the foot, which is where he gets his name Oedipus, which means clubfoot, because he had a limp from the trauma he received as an infant. He was discovered before he could perish or be eaten by wild animals, and he was raised in the countryside, ignorant of who he was. And so sure enough, he comes back to town, and not knowing that he is related to the king and the queen, he winds up killing the king and marrying the queen. And Oedipus Rex is all about the discovery of what's happened and the unraveling of that. Oedipus winds up, his mother kills herself, he winds up putting his eyes out, and he... different accounts, his mother's end is different. And he abdicates the throne and goes into exile. When he abdicates, the throne falls to his sons. He has 2 sons, Eteocles and Polynices. And they come up with this kind of strange arrangement so that they would not be rivaling with one another over the throne. They decided to take alternate years ruling the throne. And so in the first year, Eteocles is going to rule, and while he's ruling, Polynices will be exiled from Thebes, and so he won't be casting any sort of shadow or aspersion over Eteocles' rule. And then the following year, Polynices would return, and he would rule, and Eteocles would go into exile, and they would continue to alternate in this sort of way. The problem comes when at the end of the first year, Eteocles is not willing to let go of the throne and let his brother have his turn. And so this displaces Polynices and sets in motion the events that would lead to the war. Polynices therefore goes around and he gathers 7 of the greatest heroes from around Greece to fight for him, hence the name 7 against Thebes. And it's an all-star lineup of names that are less well known to us, but they're only less well known to us because we aren't looking at this war. But these are big, big names, household names, exciting characters to have on your team. And they were the following. Titius, the son of Oeneus. Oeneus was the first human to bring wine to everyone else. He was gifted wine as well as the first vine by Bacchus and shown how to plant the vine. And this is in etymology. This is a origin of why wine in Greek is oinos, is because it was Oeneus who first received the gift of wine. That's his son, Titius, is one of the 7. And Titius is the father of Diomedes, who is Odysseus' main companion in the Trojan War and who is very, very active in the Trojan War. There's Amphiaraus, the legendary seer, who foresaw the deaths of all those who attacked Thebes. And so he doesn't want to go because he knows that everyone's going to die. But he was convinced to go anyway, in part with the help of his wife. And it's funny, he sees how everyone's going to die, but he doesn't foresee his own death. He does die, but he doesn't see how it's coming. There's Hippomedon, who is a large, powerful man, sort of the Ajax of this generation. And then there's also Parthenopaeus, who's a young and exceedingly handsome but very, very arrogant man. And his spirit is glimpsed by Aeneas when Aeneas is traveling through the underworld in the Aeneid. Then there's Capaneus, who is even bigger. He's a massive, massive man, and he's an atheist. His death at the hand of Zeus is noteworthy, even in a book that is filled with noteworthy, amazing deaths. Right? Each one of these 7 heroes has got to receive a death that men will talk about for centuries to come, and Capaneus has perhaps the best one of them all. And then Adrastus, the king of Argos, who assembles and leads the army. He's the only one of the 7 to survive, and he marches on Thebes a second time with the Epigoni, who are the sons of the 7, and they succeed in conquering the city. So there's sort of a second Theban war where they continue the struggle and wind up taking it. And King Argos is the only person to fight in both of the Theban wars. And then, of course, there's Polynices, the exiled son of Oedipus. So the poem is divided into 2 parts. The first half of the poem, the first 6 books, are about the preparations for war. And then the second 6 books are about the war itself. And it's taking the Aeneid as its model for this. You even get Polynices wandering and, finding out how things have got to go and whatnot. So, and it's very intentionally modeled on the Aeneid. 6 of these 7 against Thebes are destined to die. And as I said before, each one of these deaths is glorious and memorable. I won't spoil them for you, but they're worth the price of admission. Now, the fact that we don't have the Greek Thebaid makes Statius's Latin poem the only complete epic about the war and the main epic source for the war. It's modeled, as I said, on the Aeneid, and Statius himself sets the Aeneid above his own poem at the end. He cautions, speaking directly to his poem, he says, don't sail too close to the Aeneid, just keep a respectful distance and don't try to compete with the Aeneid in any way. That may have prejudiced the way the poem is received, because right there you feel as if the poet is telling you that he feels it's not as good as the Aeneid. It has certainly had its challenges in the reception history. It seemed as if early in its life it was received favorably, but not overwhelmingly. It was well known in Rome, but it was not wildly popular in the way that the Aeneid was, or even Ovid's Metamorphoses. But it gains in popularity as we go through the centuries. By the 5th century AD, the poet Claudian, who is at the court of Honorius, one of the last Roman emperors, he is intentionally imitating the Thebaid in the way he's writing his poetry. And in the Middle Ages, its popularity exploded. It was present in Charlemagne's court. It was copied out during the Carolingian Renaissance and spread out from there. And it inspired a number of vernacular imitations. And all of this was helped by a tradition that Statius had become a Christian at the end of his life. Because Statius lived after the coming of Christ, there was a tradition that he had received Christ, and this made his works more popular. It was a major influence on Dante, and famously in the Purgatorio, when they reach a point where Virgil can't go any higher because as a non-Christian, this is as far as Virgil can go, Statius, who Dante thinks has become a Christian, takes over from Virgil and guides Dante those last few cantos until he arrives at Beatrice. This is not just, I need another poet. Who am I going to find? Statius. He's the next best Roman poet. No, it's a combination of the picture of the man, of the poet, that emerged from the poem itself and the tradition that he had become a Christian, as well as the great influence that the Thebaid had been on Dante, had on Dante. And also his Statius' Achilleid, which we discussed in another video, also influential on Dante. So he had a major poetic debt to pay here. In the 19th century, the Thebaid would often be denigrated by scholars. They said that it was derivative. They said that it was unoriginal. They said it was propaganda for the Emperor Domitian and therefore not worth the reading. But since the 1970s, the poem has been slowly regaining recognition, and some of those charges have been dismissed and pushed away. I really think that, to call it derivative and unoriginal is a bit like saying that Tolkien is derivative and unoriginal. Yeah, you can find the antecedents of lots of stuff that happens in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings in Norse mythology, but that doesn't render it derivative. It's what you do with that material. And I think Statius does something really, really spectacular with the material that he's inheriting and with his model, the Aeneid. In essence, then, this poem is key to understanding the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. It was widely known in the Middle Ages and probably universally known in the Renaissance. I don't think you would have found an educated person in Europe who did not know the Thebaid well in the Renaissance. It's one of the key stories and texts shaping the imaginations of the great writers of these two eras. So even when you don't see direct relationship thematically or in terms of structure or whatever to the Thebaid, it's still shaping how they think and how they view the world, what their sense of epic is, alongside of the Aeneid. Oedipus and his family feature widely in the visual art as well, ranging all the way back to the 7th century BC. We have urns and carvings that reference material from this story. It's not always possible to tell which art was inspired by, say, the Thebaid versus the Aeschylus cycle or whatever else. And maybe that's the wrong question to ask anyway. It's rather the notion that the Thebaid is part of all of these texts, part of this picture they present to us of this war, of these characters, and that's what does the work of shaping the imagination. It's not only this text itself, which is marvelous, but it's also the tale that the text is telling, which is striking and has captured the imagination of the West for nearly 2,000 years.